Blood pooling on cold asylum tiles was my final memory. Arthur's mocking laughter echoed as my heart stopped. Blinking, I wasn't dead. I sat in my penthouse, 3 years earlier, holding the exact contract that orchestrated my ruin. This time, I hold the pen. I am the executioner. Staring at the Mont Blanc pen resting on the mahogany desk, a violent shudder ripped through my body. My lungs expanded, pulling in the sharp, sterile scent of my penthouse office, a stark contrast to the suffocating stench of bleach and despair I had just died in. My fingers, trembling and pale, hovered over the thick stack of legal documents. "Madeline, darling?" Arthur's voice, smooth as aged bourbon and twice as intoxicating, shattered the silence. I looked up. He stood there in a bespoke charcoal suit, the afternoon sun catching the golden flecks in his hazel eyes. He looked like the perfect fiancé, the grieving partner stepping up to help me manage Harrington logistics after my father's sudden, tragic heart attack. In my previous life, I had looked at him with nothing but blind devotion. I had signed those proxy forms without reading a single clause, handing him total voting control of my 70% stake in the company. That single signature had been my death warrant. It took him exactly 18 months to bleed the company dry, funnel the assets into offshore accounts, and declare me legally incompetent. I remembered Dr. Emmett Fisher's cold hands strapping me into the psychiatric bed. I remembered Valerie, my lifelong best friend, standing beside Arthur in the asylum ward, her hand resting protectively over her slightly swollen belly, laughing as they told me I would rot there. "Madeline?" Arthur stepped closer, his brow furrowing in that perfectly practiced expression of concern. "Are you all right? You've gone completely pale. If the proxy transfer is too much today, we can wait until tomorrow, but the board is getting restless." Rage, pure and unadulterated, ignited in my veins, but I forced it down, burying it beneath a mask of overwhelming grief. I let a single tear slip down my cheek. "I'm sorry, Arthur," I whispered, my voice intentionally fragile. I dropped the pen. It clattered against the desk, rolling away from the documents. My head is splitting. Every time I look at these papers, I just see my father's empty chair. I can't do this right now. A micro-expression of irritation flashed across his handsome face, a tightening of the jaw, a slight narrowing of the eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a sympathetic sigh. He walked around the desk, placing his warm hands on my shoulders. I had to physically restrain myself from stabbing him in the throat with the letter opener. "Of course, my love," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. "You need rest. The company can survive another 24 hours without a formal chairman. I'll handle the vice presidents. You just go lie down." "Thank you," I choked out, standing up and pulling away from his touch as naturally as I could. "I think Valerie is coming over later to bring me some tea. Could you let her in when she arrives?" "Anything for you," he promised. I walked to the master bedroom, closing the heavy oak door behind me. I didn't lie down. Instead, I walked straight into the ensuite bathroom, turned on the cold water, and splashed my face. I stared at my reflection. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes wide and alive. I was 26 again. My father's empire was still intact. My personal fortune was untouched. I grabbed my phone. I didn't call Valerie. I bypassed my usual contacts and dialed a number I had only learned about in my final months of captivity, a number whispered to me by a sympathetic orderly who had realized too late that I wasn't crazy. "Harrison Investigations," a gruff voice answered. "Mr. Harrison Wells," I said, my voice steady, stripped of all the fragility I had just shown Arthur. "My name is Madeline Harrington. I need to hire you. I need comprehensive surveillance on 2 people, Arthur Prescott and Valerie Chambers. I want their phones tapped, their emails mirrored, and every financial transaction they make flagged." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Miss Harrington, that level of invasive surveillance requires a substantial retainer and discretion. I will wire $50,000 to your offshore account right now, and another 50 when you bring me the first batch of evidence," I replied coldly. "I don't care how you get it. I just need proof of everything they are hiding." You'll have a preliminary report by tomorrow morning, Harrison said, his tone shifting to complete professionalism. Hanging up, I walked over to the hidden wall safe behind the massive abstract painting my father had bought in Paris. I spun the dial 3148 and pulled the heavy metal door open. Inside were my personal bearer bonds, a stack of emergency cash, and the original untampered deeds to the family estates. Arthur didn't know the combination to this safe yet. In my past life, I had given it to him a week after the funeral. I took out my encrypted laptop and logged into my private offshore banking portal. While Arthur thought I was weeping into my pillows, I was meticulously locking down my liquid assets. I shifted $15 million from my domestic trust into a blind, irrevocable trust based in the Cayman Islands, naming myself as the sole beneficiary and requiring dual biometric authentication to move a single dime. By the time I heard the front door chime and Valerie's overly sweet voice echoing in the hallway, I was perfectly composed. I slipped back into bed, pulling the duvet up to my chin, and prepared to face the two people who had murdered me. "Maddie, sweetie?" Valerie cooed, pushing the bedroom door open. She held a tray with a steaming porcelain teapot. She looked radiant, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer dress hugging her slim figure, the figure that, I now knew, belonged to the woman sleeping with my fiancé. "Val," I murmured, offering a weak, grateful smile. "I'm so glad you're here. Let the games begin." 3 days passed. 3 days of playing the shattered, grieving daughter. 3 days of watching Arthur and Valerie exchange secret, triumphant glances across my dining table while they fed me drugged chamomile tea I secretly poured into the potted fiddle-leaf fig by the window the moment they turned their backs. On the 4th morning, while Arthur was at the corporate headquarters pretending to hold the company together, my burner phone vibrated. A secure email from Harrison Wells had just landed in my inbox. Sitting in the solitude of my private study, I decrypted the file. I thought I knew the depths of their betrayal, but seeing the cold, hard data on the screen made my blood run to ice. Arthur wasn't just a greedy opportunist. He was desperately drowning. The documents Harrison uncovered revealed that Arthur's boutique investment firm, Prescott Capital, was entirely a front. He was over $40 million in debt to a syndicate of shadow lenders. He had been borrowing money to cover catastrophic losses in short-selling schemes. The syndicates were threatening his life. That was why he needed Harrington Logistics so badly. He needed to liquidate my father's assets to save his own skin. Then, I opened the file on Valerie. Photographs loaded onto the screen. High-resolution shots of Valerie and Arthur slipping into a boutique hotel on the Upper East Side. Bank statements showing Arthur wiring thousands of dollars into a shell company named Apex Solutions, which was registered to Valerie's maiden name. But the most damning piece of evidence was a medical record from a private clinic in Chelsea. Valerie was already 6 weeks pregnant. A dark, bitter laugh escaped my lips. In my past life, they had convinced me the stress of running the company was making me paranoid, hallucinating their affair. They used my delusions as the foundation for my institutionalization. I closed the laptop and picked up my phone. It was time to start setting the snare. I called Beatrice Cole. Beatrice was a legendary corporate raider on Wall Street. Ruthless, brilliant, and utterly devoid of sentiment. She also despised Arthur Prescott. Years ago, Arthur had publicly humiliated her protégé, stealing a lucrative merger right out from under her firm. Beatrice never forgave, and she never forgot. In my past life, I had avoided her because Arthur told me she was a vulture trying to pick my father's bones clean. Now, she was my greatest asset. "Madeline Harrington." Beatrice's sharp voice crackled over the line. "I must admit, I didn't expect to hear from you. My condolences on Richard's passing. He was a worthy adversary." "Thank you, Beatrice," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "I'm calling because I have a mutually beneficial proposition. I know you've been trying to acquire the Atlantic shipping routes that Harrington Logistics controls." "I have," she said cautiously. "But word on the street is your fiancé is taking the helm, and he's firmly against any divestment." My fiancé is a figurehead who doesn't realize the guillotine is already dropping, I replied smoothly. I am holding a private, unrecorded meeting at the Pierre Hotel tomorrow at 8 p.m. I have information regarding Arthur's financial solvency that will allow you to buy his personal firm for pennies on the dollar, completely destroying his reputation in the process. In exchange, I need you to act as a hostile proxy during my upcoming board meeting. There was a long silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in Beatrice's formidable mind. You're throwing him to the wolves, she finally said, a hint of dark amusement in her voice. No, Beatrice, I corrected softly. I am the wolf. I'm just inviting you to dinner. I'll be at the Pierre at 8, she agreed. The next few weeks were a masterpiece of misdirection. I finally signed a proxy document for Arthur, but with a critical hidden addendum drafted by my new cutthroat legal team. The document gave him operational authority, but absolutely no right to liquidate, sell, or leverage company shares without a secondary, encrypted digital signature that only I possessed. Arthur, blinded by his own arrogance and desperate need for cash, didn't have his lawyers check the fine print thoroughly enough. He saw my signature and thought he had won the world. He immediately went to work. Believing he had total control, he began aggressively cutting ties with our legacy vendors, attempting to funnel supply contracts to Apex Solutions, Valerie's shell company. He was sloppy. He was so desperate to pay off his shadow creditors that he left a paper trail a mile wide. Meanwhile, I lived my life spectacularly. With my offshore funds secured, I began spending money with reckless, visible abandon. I bought a vineyard in Tuscany. I attended high society galas draped in custom Dior, dripping in diamonds. I made sure the paparazzi caught me laughing, thriving, looking like a woman who didn't have a care in the world. Arthur was furious, though he tried to hide it. Madeline, darling, don't you think you're being a bit extravagant? He asked one evening, finding me in the walk-in closet, packing a Louis Vuitton trunk for a weekend in Monaco. The bags under his eyes were dark. The syndicate was clearly pressing him for payments he couldn't make because my legal trap had frozen his ability to liquidate my stocks. Extravagant? I turned to him, holding up a diamond tennis bracelet. Arthur, I'm grieving. My therapist said I need to embrace life, to find joy. You told me not to worry about the company, that you had everything under control. Are you saying you don't? No, of course I have it under control, he snapped, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his facade cracking. It's just optics, Maddie. It looks bad to the board. Let the board worry about the board, I smiled sweetly, stepping close and patting his cheek. His skin was clammy. You just focus on your little projects, Arthur. I have a flight to catch. I walked past him, smelling the faint trace of Valerie's Tom Ford perfume on his collar. I didn't care anymore. Let them sleep together. Let them scheme. Because while Arthur was leaving frantic voicemails on my phone, begging me to authorize a stock transfer to save the company from a cash flow crisis, I was sitting on a yacht in the Mediterranean, sipping champagne with Beatrice Cole. I was too busy living my best life to answer his desperate pleas. I was too busy watching his empire of lies slowly burn to the ground, and the main event hadn't even started yet. Monaco's azure waters faded into memory the moment my private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport. My burner phone, previously silenced to preserve my peace of mind, was now vibrating with the intensity of a seismic fault. Voicemails from Arthur clogged my inbox. His perfectly modulated, aristocratic voice had entirely deteriorated into a ragged, breathless panic over the past 48 hours. Maddie, please pick up the damn phone, his recorded voice cracked, the veneer of the loving fiancé entirely stripped away. The European suppliers are threatening to pull out. I need the biometric approval code for the asset transfer. Madeline, this isn't a game. The company is bleeding. Call me back the second you get this. Smiling, I deleted the message. The company wasn't bleeding. Arthur was. He had called an emergency board meeting for 10 o'clock that Tuesday morning at the Harrington Logistics headquarters in Manhattan. He intended to bypass me entirely, using a loophole he thought he found to force a vote of no confidence in my absence, allowing him to push through the liquidation of our Atlantic assets to save his own skin. Stepping into my chauffeured Maybach, I adjusted the cuffs of my pristine, tailored white Chanel suit. I wasn't just going to a board meeting, I was going to an execution. When I strode into the towering glass and steel lobby of my father's building, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the administrative staff. They had been fed the narrative by Arthur that I was too emotionally unstable to leave my penthouse, a fragile heiress teetering on the edge of a breakdown. Yet here I was, commanding the room with every click of my Louboutins against the marble floor. I bypassed the reception desk and took the private elevator to the executive floor. The heavy mahogany doors to the boardroom were closed. Inside, I could hear Arthur's raised voice, slick with desperation. "Gentlemen, I assure you, Madeline's absence is a tragedy, but it is a necessity," Arthur was saying as I pushed the doors open. "She is simply not of sound mind to manage these complexities. We must authorize the sale to Apex Solutions immediately to stabilize our quarterly." "I wouldn't advise that, Thomas," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the thick, tense air of the boardroom like a scythe. Silence slammed into the room. Arthur froze at the head of the table, his hands suspended in midair. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. His hazel eyes widened in sheer terror. Around the massive table, the 12 senior board members, including my father's oldest confidant, Thomas Kensington, stared at me in shock. "Madeline," Thomas breathed, standing up. "My dear, Arthur told us you were hospitalized." "Did he?" I smiled, walking slowly toward the head of the table. I didn't look at Arthur yet. I kept my gaze fixed on the board. I suppose that would have been convenient for him. But as you can see, I am perfectly healthy. In fact, I've never seen things more clearly. "Maddie, what are you doing here?" Arthur hissed, stepping toward me. He tried to grab my arm, to play the concerned partner, but I sidestepped him effortlessly. The smell of his nervous sweat was potent, completely overpowering his expensive cologne. "I am here to protect my father's legacy," I stated clearly. I turned toward the heavy double doors I had left slightly ajar. "You can come in now, Beatrice." The collective gasp from the board members was audible. Beatrice Cole stepped into the room, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys carrying thick leather briefcases. Beatrice wore a severe black suit, her silver hair pulled back into a tight chignon, looking every inch the Wall Street predator she was renowned to be. "Beatrice Cole?" Arthur choked out, his voice leaping an octave. "What is the meaning of this? She has no business here." "Actually, Arthur, she does," I replied, finally turning to look him dead in the eye. "Because as of 9 o'clock this morning, Beatrice Cole is the majority debt holder of Prescott Capital." "She owns you." Arthur stumbled back, hitting the edge of the mahogany table. "That's impossible. The syndicate." "The syndicate was more than happy to sell your toxic, defaulting debts to my firm for a premium," Beatrice purred, taking a seat at the table uninvited. "You owe $40 million, Arthur. And since you failed to liquidate Harrington's assets to pay them off, your firm is entirely insolvent." "You couldn't liquidate my assets, Arthur," I added softly, relishing the absolute horror blooming on his face. "Did you really think I didn't read the proxy agreement? I retained absolute veto power over any financial transfers. Your signature was completely worthless." "You set me up," he whispered, his eyes darting frantically around the room, realizing the walls were closing in. "You knew." "I know everything," I said. I snapped my fingers, and Harrison Wells, my private investigator, stepped into the room from the hallway. He began distributing thick, bound dossiers to every board member. "Gentlemen," I addressed the board, my tone strictly business. "In those folders you will find irrefutable proof of Arthur Prescott's corporate espionage, fraud, and embezzlement. You will see wire transfers, proving he created a shell company, Apex Solutions, to funnel Harrington Capital directly into his own failing enterprise. You will also see that Apex Solutions is registered to Valerie Chambers." Thomas Kensington adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents. His face darkened with fury. "This is treasonous, Arthur. You were stealing from Richard's estate while his body was barely cold." "It's a lie!" Arthur screamed, slamming his fists on the table, the suave facade entirely shattered. "She's insane! Madeline is clinically insane! I have doctors who will testify to it!" "The only people going to an institution, Arthur, are you and your pregnant mistress," I said coldly, "and yours will have iron bars." Chaos erupted in the boardroom. Thomas Kensington immediately called for security, while Beatrice's lawyers began outlining the criminal charges they were filing on behalf of the company. Arthur tried to bolt for the door, but Harrison Wells stood squarely in the frame, crossing his arms over his massive chest. 2 burly security guards arrived seconds later, grabbing Arthur by the arms. "Madeline, you can't do this! I love you!" Arthur shrieked as they dragged him backward, his Italian leather shoes scuffed against the pristine marble. "Please, Maddie, the syndicate will kill me if I don't pay. Maddie, listen to me." His desperate pleas echoed down the glass corridor, growing fainter as the elevator doors closed on him. I didn't flinch. My heart, which had once beaten only for him, was a block of solid ice. I was too busy calculating the exact trajectory of his downfall to care about his ruin. But the symphony of revenge wasn't complete without the second movement. I left Beatrice and Thomas to manage the corporate cleanup and took my car to the Upper East Side. I had one final stop to make. Valerie's luxury apartment building was quiet mid-afternoon. Because Arthur had been paying her rent with my money, I had naturally obtained the key card from the building management by showing them the fraudulent lease documents. I didn't knock. I simply unlocked the door and pushed it open. Valerie was sitting on her plush velvet sofa, wearing a silk robe I had gifted her for her birthday last year, painting her toenails. She looked up, startled, the brush freezing in her hand. "Maddie?" she gasped, scrambling to pull the robe tighter around her slightly rounded belly. "What are you doing here? You didn't call." "I didn't think I needed an invitation to an apartment paid for by my own family's money," I said, stepping inside and closing the door softly behind me. I walked around the living room, trailing a finger over the expensive modern art on the walls. "It's over, Valerie." Her face went completely ashen. She tried to play dumb, a desperate flutter of her eyelashes. "I don't know what you're talking about, sweetie. Are you feeling well? Did you forget to take your medication?" "Drop the act," I snapped, the venom finally leaking into my voice. "Arthur is currently in police custody for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and attempting to defraud a major corporation. The FBI is seizing all of his assets, including the accounts tied to Apex Solutions. Your accounts, Valerie." The bottle of nail polish slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, a pool of blood-red lacquer spreading rapidly. "No," she whimpered, tears springing to her eyes. "No," Arthur said he had it handled. "He said we were going to be rich. He said you were too stupid to notice." "He said a lot of things," I replied, looking down at her with absolute disgust. "He also told the federal investigators that Apex Solutions was entirely your idea. He threw you under the bus the second the handcuffs clicked, Valerie. He claimed you manipulated him, used your pregnancy to extort him into stealing the money." "That bastard!" Valerie screamed, her face twisting into an ugly, hateful mask. "It was his plan. He needed the money for the shadow lenders. I was just helping him." "And you helped him by trying to lock me in a psychiatric ward," I stated, my voice dangerously low. "You stood in that hospital room in my past life and laughed while they strapped me down." Valerie stared at me, confusion mixing with her terror. "Past life? Maddie, what are you talking about?" "It doesn't matter," I sighed, adjusting my Chanel jacket. "What matters is that the lease on this apartment is officially terminated. The police will be here in approximately 10 minutes to arrest you for conspiracy to commit fraud. You have exactly that long to pack whatever fits into a single suitcase." "Maddie, please!" Valerie threw herself off the sofa, landing on her knees in the spilled nail polish. She grabbed the hem of my skirt, sobbing hysterically. "Please! I'm pregnant! You can't let them send me to jail!" "I'm your best friend! I'll give the money back, I swear." I looked down at the woman who had plotted my murder, the woman who had smiled as my life was stolen from me. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sorrow, no anger. Just a profound, liberating emptiness. My best friend died the day you slept with my fiancé, I said quietly, pulling my skirt from her desperate grip. Enjoy your new life, Valerie. I turned and walked out of the apartment, the sound of her hysterical wailing piercing the quiet hallway. I didn't look back. By the end of the week, the news cycle was completely saturated with the Harrington logistics scandal. Arthur's spectacular fall from grace was front-page news. Facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence and Beatrice Cole's ruthless legal team, his defense collapsed. The Shadow Syndicate, realizing they would never see their money, made sure Arthur's life inside a federal penitentiary was a living nightmare. Valerie, entirely destitute and facing her own lengthy sentence, was abandoned by everyone she knew. They had tried to bury me alive. Instead, they handed me the shovel I used to dig their graves. Sitting on the balcony of my penthouse, overlooking the glittering skyline of the city that was now entirely mine, I raised a glass of vintage Dom Perignon to the sunset. I had survived the fire and emerged as the absolute architect of my own destiny. Revenge isn't a dish best served cold. It's best served while wearing custom couture and watching your enemies drown in the traps they built for you. What would you have done if you woke up in the same room as the people who ruined you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you crave more twisted tales of karma and betrayal, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more.